I stop there.
Pat, do you want to come in and share?
Yeah, I'll comment on the capacity question, I guess. I'll just start by saying that we're quite, I guess we come from a different end of the spectrum in terms of the business world, but I have a very similar view to yours. We invest in very early stage companies and hope to see them become very large ones, which are primarily the companies that you probably tend to work with. From a capacity point of view, I think there's a sort of policy-making capacity question, which is we come out of Copenhagen hopefully with an agreement. Well, then that has to filter down to various regions, countries, cities, as the case may be, different industries. There's going to be allocations. I mean, it's going to take a long time for this to actually become policy that can be acted upon. So there's that whole issue. In addition, there's actually, if you're talking specifically about the money, there's a deployment of capital issue just from the public sector. I mean, if you look at what's happening with the stimulus packages, both in Europe and the US, despite all the announcements, very little of that money has actually been put to use now. And we're, getting on towards a year now. So I think that, there is a real question about whether the existing institutions are keyed up to actually deliver on this. I would sort of add to your comment about push versus pull that I would hope that the bulk of this sort of mythical $160 billion number that's been talked about, I don't know how it's going to be spent, but I would hope that it's not primarily given to companies to support them through valley of death or whatever you want to call it. I would much prefer, and I also hope that it's not just spent to subsidize products that are too expensive and that shouldn't otherwise make economic sense. What I would love to see is the bulk of that money spent to facilitate markets where there is a good ROI already, but there are inhibitors to that, to those being adopted. For instance, if you look at energy efficiency, there's huge transaction costs, but the ROI is very clear. I mean, if you talk to the average tenant in a building, they know that if they put light bulbs in or they insulate or whatever, the payback is good, but there's good reasons for them not to do that. They don't own the building, they don't have the capital to do it, et cetera. So, I mean, that's a very micro example, but I'd much rather see the money be used in a way that actually ends up in a net saving, but facilitates and accelerates a series of market growths that would otherwise be inhibited. So we'll see how it plays out, I guess.
So, does that mean you feel that today, if subsidies and support from public side is more of sort of providing, sort of giving away the money, as you say, it should be rather being used more of an investment kind of a model? These funds, if the new funds and the way it's working today? I
mean, it's a societal investment model, right? So the way I think about it is if you look at for instance, take the carbon abatement curve that either the IPCC or the one that from the Vattenfall analysis, you start on the left with sort of negative cost up to 8 or 10 gigatons of CO2, and then you get into positive cost. Well, why don't we start by focusing on the part that's below the line, where we know that if we can actually make those occur as adopters of technology, there will actually be cost savings. You can then pump that money back in and at the same time be bringing down the cost of the things on the right side of the curve. So I'd rather see those sorts of policy instruments rather than, much as venture capitalists love feed-in tariffs, because that's, caused lots of people to make lots of money, particularly in Germany and the people who back those solar companies, and it's launched a whole industry, which is great. From a societal point of view, I think there's probably ways to spend that money that are more sustainable in the long term and actually, bring down the long-term cost of addressing climate change.
I would just like to add that even if you would do it right, it might not happen. And that's our conviction that we look at the building sector, that even if we would do everything right, it will not happen. So and this is speaking from big business, saying that the market cannot take care of everything. So you need to have certain standards, you need to have labels, you need to have certain codes and code of conduct, etc., in order to make that change happen. So it's not only financial incentives that drive this. You need also another type of complements in order to achieve this transformative change.
Yeah, as you were saying, it's the whip and the carrot. You need both. And the legislation is probably the whip, where you bring down the maximum allowed energy consumption in buildings, for example. That in itself will drive innovation and new products. But then, of course, if you want that process to go faster, then you can subsidize some. But as you say, they should be almost profitable by themselves. That's the best ones to use. But,
If I may just support that, and I think this is something that is trying to be implemented by the member states in the legislation that's developed at the European level. I think the Eco-Design Directive, which sets the energy requirements for product groups, currently mostly electrical products, but which plans to be expanded. This very much sets now a moving target scheme for products that will, over time, let's say the top performance in the product group will become the new standard. So this will be a continuous moving target. Another thing that I think is gaining much more recognition right now is also in our impact assessments of the legislation, of legislative proposals, to see what would be the impact now on innovation performance, on the innovativeness of the given sector for which the sector is this legislation is directed towards.
So let's move on to the next C of cooperation, we heard Stefan mentioning, for instance, the patent issue in negotiations as one element of facilitating or maybe also making it difficult for technologies to spread. And I was listening into the workshop or the panel discussion on the regional development previously when it was discussed examples how, for instance, Finland put together and worked together with 100 companies and opening doors for them in China. In negotiations, it's discussed very much of a new way of technology transfer, not just sort of selling and sending the technology to the developing world, but rather they want to have a collaboration and a partnership on more equal terms, meaning that there might be need for a new way of working together if you want to sell to these new markets or use these new opportunities. And starting with Svante, how do you look at these kind of initiatives for supporting and making collaboration? Do you look for them? Are you seeking for them to be part of them in your strategy to expand internationally?
Yes, we do, because as someone said in the earlier session, Sweden is a very small market, and even the European market is a small market. And for us, that deals with mainly energy systems in new buildings. Then of course we need to go to the markets where there's a high level of new construction. So I've been to China, I'm going to India in 2 weeks, and that's where we want to find our next markets. But then of course IP rights, it's of course a sensitive matter, because it's important to us to get money back so we can develop the company. But then of course there's usually some way of negotiating through that. You either set up a subsidy or you have a joint venture where people can share. It's just that we want to go in and set the price and milk the money. It's a negotiation.
So do you see that there are projects or initiatives which you can use or join if you want to take that way on your strategy or expansion?
Yeah, I think so. And also we shouldn't forget that Chinese applications, patent applications are rising. The Chinese themselves are using the patent system. And right now they're using it to protect themselves against other Chinese companies. But in the future they will invent stuff that they will use to protect themselves from our interference. So I guess right now the system is probably a bit unbalanced because we are experienced to use the system, but in the future it will be much more level, and then I don't think this will be an issue, the patent or the IP rights in itself. It's the negotiation that's the most important.